Hello and welcome to the Bitlemmas Podcast. I'm Watson. I'm here with Drew and B Sovereign. We're the Bitlemmas group. We're going to be reviewing Slicing Pie by Mike Moyer. And welcome. I hope you enjoy yourself. So, this book, what's the thesis? It's an interesting book as far as it tries to wrestle with fair compensation, and there's many different books that try to wrestle with this topic, but this is an interesting one because it has lots of what I call sane defaults, and so we're going to talk about some of those. But what's the core thesis? Well, Mike Moyer says that early equity is hard to value. But when you're doing any type of enterprise, people still demand fairness. Mike Moyer talks about fixed splits. So this is when you do kind of you can do like a 50-50 share, 33% across three people type split. That seems simple, but it breaks under change. And we're going to talk about all of these as we go forward. His main solution is what he calls a contribution ledger. So relative inputs over time, that's relative to the person doing the work, doing the inputs. And then at some point in time, that he calls a conversion moment, then you'll convert into formal equity, which is options, shares, that type of thing. Some major premises of the book. What is equity? Equity, in his definition, is a claim on future cash. It is a claim on what the enterprise, the business, the company is going to do in the future, the cash it's going to have. It is not a paycheck today. It's not a claim on a paycheck in the immediate, future. At the start, equity has little market value. It's all guesswork on what is the value of the company or really the idea. So you can kind of think of ideas as worthless. They have little value. The market doesn't even know what your idea is. So it has no value on the market. But the paradox is that people still expect fairness and they expect consistency with whatever it is that you're promising in the beginning and then what you're promising at the end. And he likes to bring up this idea of there's these little moments in time where people say, hey, what is it that we're all getting out of this? What's my share? And he's saying that that is the most dangerous question. And then that's what causes issues. Now, he has two concepts of what he calls slicing the pie and baking, right? Pre-baked and post-baked. So a pre-baked split, like splitting a pie, slicing a pie, and the pie is the ownership of what is the value of the company. If you do a pre-baked split, what do you run into? Later, you run into a problem of renegotiation. We'll talk more about that, and or in inequity. So some type of unfairness. If you do post-baked, so that's waiting until the company succeeds. Oh, we have money coming in now. Now you have a feeding frenzy over the ownership and you have resentment. Fixed splits, a core premise of the book is fixed splits are an anti-pattern, or they are some type of problem. They're always some type of problem. Slicing pie means keep slicing as the inputs arrive. So you're not doing a dynamic split. Here are some claims that I found to be counterintuitive but true. Fixed splits always create fairness problems. If you're going to say, again, going back to the pre-bake, if you're going to say we're going to split 33% across the board in the beginning, you're guessing on how much work is required for the 33%. If you do it after the fact, in one sense, you're guessing on what people think that they contributed, if you're planning on doing that. But really, you most likely are not planning, and you're saying, we're all adults. We'll just split it how we see fit, and it'll just work. And then you get the feeding frenzy and the resentment.
It's always done premature, the way I see it.
Yeah, most of the time. So that's the first claim. Second claim, equity is worthless now and can still burn you. What does that mean? The idea of a company, what you're working on, is worth nothing on the market. Ideas are worthless.
Yeah.
But that can still be a problem.
Yeah, no monetary value has been created yet. So it's hard for you to put a price tag on it, on the efforts and the efforts that people are actually going to put in, later down the line.
Yeah. But the claim in the book is that it can still burn you. It'll still be a problem, even though it's worthless right now. So that's counterintuitive. Fairness requires a ledger. So a ledger is rules and tracking, right? You may think, hey, we're all adults again, and we don't need to track every single thing. I've seen this claim. That's going to be too burdensome. So why would you do that? And he's saying that, no, if you're going to be fair, you do need to track. So that's his solution for part of the solution for fairness. And the final claim, you don't need valuation. You need conversion rules. So valuation saying, oh, here's what the company, if you were just really good at, you see in business books where people talk about vision and saying, hey, I could see that the iPod was going to be a great thing, so I invested in it, or whatever it is. I saw this great idea, and I saw it, and I valued it, and it was easy for me, right? And he's saying that you don't need that valuation. What you really need is how you convert the inputs, the contributions people do and make, into ownership dynamically. That's what you need. So those are the four claims that I found to be counterintuitive in the book, but I find them to be true. So claim number 1, fixed splits are always create fairness problems. So whenever there's the term always, the people are going to resist and say, not always, but it pretty much, you're guessing. So you could get really, really lucky. And I would, to push back on this, people believe, I would say a good chunk of people actually, they believe that if you signed up for a thing on your own free will, you get what you deserve. It was fair. No matter what you agreed to, as long as you willingly entered into that agreement, it's fair. Now, he has plenty of examples in the book where it's not fair. I can just bring some of them up, but we'll get to some. But and when you see the example, you can say, okay, yeah, that's silly. It's not. Just because you agree doesn't mean that it's fair. But that's a pushback that I would say a great deal of people who have like an entrepreneurial spirit, that's kind of the first thing they push back with on something like this. Now, why is this the case? So startups change faster than your first agreement. You did your guesswork. I'm going to use an example. You're making a video game, and you have a designer, you have a developer, and you have the business person. You do your guesswork on how much is required for that game. You thought you had the great vision, whatever. Okay. The changes that happen after you start work, that's where you're going to run into, into reality.
Yeah, because things are always more expensive than you first initially thought they were going to be, and there's always inevitably going to be a problem that's going to require some more time to put in.
Yep, and the point being not an equal amount of time. So one role may be required more than another, and it's too hard to figure that out. If you could figure that out from the beginning, we know that the dev work is going to be a year, the design work is going to be a year, and then of course the idea is so great that they're gonna just beat a path to our door, right? You build a better mousetrap, the world is going to beat a path to the door. That's what people think. And the business guy, it's like, yeah, we only need 6 months of that person, whatever, right? So, but we'll give you 33% anyways, and that's kind of what people think up front, and then it goes haywire. So
it always changes, right? It's always evolving and changing as you're working through whatever you're working through.
Right. So he says fixed equity becomes a fairness debt. So you have this general intuition, and you may say 33% across the board, or you may have some intuition, like you said, if you do the pre-bake, 33% for 3 people. And then you may say, well, we'll figure it out later. And then you have an intuition at that point, right? But you didn't record, no one's saying how much work they did. The fairness debt is that belief that the claim that people have that they think what they're owed. And then there's kind of like, I would say there's a kind of an economic principle. Doesn't really have a name that I know of, but it's hilarious. So if you have a janitor and you have a shack that you want cleaned, the shack normally $500 to clean it. Just, you're being generous. $500 to clean it. It takes like 3-4 hours, whatever, clean it. Right?
Mm-hmm.
If you pay that janitor $1 million to clean that shack, after about 2 to 3 weeks, they will believe that they deserved the $1 million. After about some amount of time, they will believe that they deserved it. It doesn't matter. After the fact, people's belief of what they're owed, it increases to whatever they were done. In this case, they'll say, I was there at the right time. I know that you really needed it cleaned. So, I'm really doing a favor for you for the $1 million, but whatever. They'll be like, yeah, that was a great deal. But they're not going to be like, hey, give me that. If you say, hey, you know what, I overpaid you, they're going to go, wait a minute.
No, that was fair. That was a perfect amount.
Yeah. So this idea of a fairness debt. Eventually, someone's going to feel, after the fact, they're going to feel burned and underfed. So that's this fixed split claim. Here's an example. 50-50 trap. Everybody, you got 2 people. Hey, we're going to split it down the middle 50-50. Two founders. 6 months later, you got time, you got cash, you got risk, you got skill. They're not equal. Now it's time to renegotiate. It becomes personal. They're like, you obviously know that I've done 90% of the work here. Right? And then so now it's going to be conflict. Here's another example. Again, game development. This is roughly based on a real, of course, it's happened multiple times, but there's a real example of this. I saw a documentary. but you can know people that this has happened to. Again, designer, dev, business person. You got three people. The designer, you think it's a great idea. Everybody is like, oh, people are jumping into this genre of game. We're going to build it out. I have this experience, whatever. The designer does the thing for for a year. The development gets to that point, and for the year, and you have something that you can launch with. What ends up happening is, the business guy goes out there, they try to develop or they try to sell it. And it's like, yeah, if we could just do this little different thing. So you end up pivoting. The designer is like, hey, I'm off to greener, pastures. They're like, okay, I'm just going to work on this thing that it's probably just only going to take like a week. Okay. For the next 5 years, they pivot like 2-3 times. Right. The business person comes up and says, oh, I have someone that's going to invest. They'll invest $1 million. They see if you just go ahead and get another designer and repurpose it and do this, you fill this niche and you give them some money, so you give them some equity, they're ready to go ahead and do the $1 million. Well, what ends up happening is that person, the designer has been gone. The 33% designer has been gone for years. The investor, we're going to talk about this again, but the investor is like, hey, you guys have to dilute your ownership in order to give me ownership. That 33% guy is gone. They're like, I'm not diluting nothing. I'm not even talking to you. I know if you make some money, you're going to give me 33% though. The investor doesn't like that. They want, because they're like, hey, what if we needed to get another round of funding? Now I have to dilute my ownership. The other two have to dilute theirs, but this other absentee owner, they don't dilute theirs. They hate that. So that's one problem with this whole concept of pre-baked, fixed, and all this stuff like that with this negotiation. But of course, you can see it's going to be an issue. Again, pre-baked slicing, you guess the work and risk up front, and the reality diverges. You pivot, you renegotiate, and you say, hey, I've done 80% of the hours. And the other person was like, but I had the idea and I'm just smart. When we got together, it was, I'll be the brains and you'll be the brawn. Right. This whole negotiation thing after the fact, it's really painful. And what ends up happening, if you don't do that, then you have resentment.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and I mean, as a former underwriter, it's almost like it's unmaintainable from the very beginning. It's like it's assuming that the future is going to look exactly like the past, and we all know that things change on the dime. So it's putting anything or solidifying anything like upfront on any project is just not good.
Yep.
By the time it's usually written down or documented somewhere, it's already changed. In my experience, a lot of the times.
Yep.
Precisely.
Yep. So the split stops tracking reality. Now you got this post-baked slicing. You wait until the pie has value. Again, the company now has customers and they're paying. Now everyone races to get their share. Like, oh, I did this much. I did this much. People feel burned, especially the late people who came in late, who got the project over the hump. Right? The thing could have been gonna go into the garbage can. And someone came in and it's like, oh, I have a special skill. I know how to retrieve this from the garbage. And then they're like, okay, now it's time to split. And they're like, okay, yeah, but you get like this 1% or nothing. Right? It becomes a feeding frenzy, all this other stuff. So that's the post-baked slicing. Where do the fixed splits break? This is some questions to ask yourself when you're doing any enterprise, even if you're doing a school project, college, school. You say, oh, you'll do this component of the project, you'll do this component. Oh, I'm going to present at the end. I'm doing all the research. I'm doing all the, okay. And that's a fixed split. And then what is the outcome? The grade. And so when somebody knows, oh, this person cares about their grade, now they can slack. Right. That's just saying if they were scheming. Right. So these fixed splits, they break. So you can have resentment. People, you talk to people with group projects, they have resentment all the time. They say, somebody was
Especially when you're
slack.
putting the entire team on your back,
Yeah. So that's the person, that's the overachiever, can have resentment. Right. And that I guess that's really in these group projects, that's really, a lot of times where it's going to happen. The other time is when somebody says the idea people, here's a concept. You can have someone that's ambitious and you can have someone that's lazy. Right? So a lazy person, they don't want to do anything, but it doesn't mean that they're ambitious, that they have pie in the sky dreams, right? And you can have someone that has pie in the sky dreams. That doesn't mean that they're lazy. Obviously, they could be a hard worker. But the problem is when you have someone that's ambitious and lazy, right? And, and this is going to hurt people's feelings, but that's idea people. They're like, I have these great ideas. I have the brains. You have the brawn. Let's go. And you know what? I'll let you keep 5% of that. Right? Ambitious and lazy is a problem. So that kind of thing, that's resentment. Comes. Oh, but my thing is that those people, the point is, they have a tremendous amount of resentment after the fact. That's the type of person that will sue you. They're like, oh no, it was my idea. I rushed at the end and did a trademark, something.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right?
It was patented.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that kind of reminds me of the Facebook, the whole drama when it first started with the guys who paid Zuckerberg to build it. It was our idea, it's ours. And then he kind of took off with it because it ended up being a great idea, I guess, for social networking.
Yeah, I don't know how much of the movie was accurate.
Yeah.
But they had it in there to where he was working on the project and he kind of stole the idea, the code, or whatever.
Yeah. It just kind of reminds me of that kind of notion, like this was ours, and then he took off with it, and
Yeah. Got with the Napster guy and then really did it. That's what's so funny when the Napster guy, I forget his name, but he was like, it's like we could make $1 million. $1 million not cool. You know what's cool? $1 billion. That's cool. Right. But yeah. So yeah, some of these things, what changed after a split was said, what would have made the split feel fair later? Everybody runs into these types of questions. So claim number 2. Equity can be worthless now and still burn you. What does this mean? Early equity has little market value. Ideas are worthless. But it is still a promise about future fairness. Perceived fairness, people thinking that you're being unfair or that the system's unfair, damages relationships. It damages trust. It damages collaboration efforts. This is what you're running into when you have the idea, even though it's worthless, and you burning it. Perceived unfairness will burn you. So basically, he's raising the stakes. The author's raising the stakes and saying, you need to think about this. You may say, we'll figure it out later. We'll burn that bridge when we come to it. Oh, you'll get burned. All right. So how much do we each get? This is the dangerous question, the most dangerous question that everybody can ask, anyone can ask. If contribution affects outcomes, right? So I'm putting a bunch of hours, that kind of thing. That's in the outcome. Something good happened from the hours getting done. the question becomes explosive. If contribution doesn't affect outcomes, then nobody cares. If it's unanswered, the partnerships fail. If it's answered prematurely, it becomes a fairness debt. All the stuff that we talk about. Yeah. So what would make this feel fair, right? In the beginning, if you take equity instead of cash, okay. So when you're reasoning about this, what rules would you demand up front? So this is kind of teasing some of his rules, contribution, sane defaults, I call them, right? And then, so how do you record that? What proof would you want in the ledger? It's got to end up being like logging hours and things like that. Claim number 3. Fairness requires a ledger. Rules and tracking. So tracking relative inputs. Relative to what? Relative to the person doing the inputs. You have to agree on these valuation rules. So agree on how much an input is worth before the contribution. Time tracking is a feature. People will say, it's a burden to track all of this stuff. Well, his argument is that later on, let's say that you're going to be acquired. Let's say that you're going to get funding. Let's say that you become a mature company and it's time for you to move over to shares and options and things. When you have the time tracking, now you have the discipline and the visibility into the work that was done. So now you have a good negotiation position, an excellent one. Whereas if you don't have that, then you run into problems. Go ahead.
I kind of see this one as like it removes those memory-based arguments that you come up with, or you're fighting over the fairness. It reduces the politics involved too, and then the contributions are visible to everyone. That's the way I see this one.
Yeah, like this is pretty much like a core principle for like financial governance. Like from my time as an underwriter, and it applies perfectly here. We always say that, in math, we don't trust the borrower's narrative, we trust the numbers. This system essentially replaces the need for personal trust in, an objective mathematical process. Instead of, but before equity instead of credit,
Okay, so now the author has this concept of the grunt fund. So this is basically the ownership pool. Anything that's valuable, it goes in there. Every contribution is logged with a pre-agreed value. We're going to talk about that in a bit and using the examples. Your percentage equals your theoretical value divided by the total theoretical value. So you have the total pie of what the whole value is of the entity, and you don't know what the value of it is. So one of the things he says is you have no idea what the value of a company is until someone writes you a check or you get customers, and then you know what the value of it is. That's it. It's plain and simple. It doesn't matter what your idea is. So it's a theoretical value before that happens. And with that theoretical value, you can use that to your advantage, actually, because you can do dynamic splits based off of the inputs that you agree to. You can recalculate at any time, and he's saying you need to recalculate all the time. You're going to do dynamic splits as inputs come in. So hours, let's say, but there's other things other than hours. You convert that into ownership. And then also, ownership doesn't mean control. So there you go. It makes ownership a living map of reality, so you don't run into the issues. So valuing inputs. Some examples. Hours. You basically have a general hourly rate. You can do something to where you say this person is a designer, they're worth X amount on the market. So people's value on the market, you can figure that out. And you say, okay, this person's worth, $55 an hour. This person is worth $100 an hour, whatever, right? take the salary and divide it by 2080. And then also he's saying that for any startup, basically you need to cap it at 200 at something, the equivalent of 200. Like 20 years from now, it'll probably be higher than that from inflation, but but here's part of the conversion rules. Unpaid hours, because of the risk you're taking risk. If you work, you may not get paid in the future. The idea may be worthless. It may not happen. Unpaid hours are 2x. Anybody that gets paid immediately, they're 1x. They have no ownership from that. You get nothing. But unpaid is 2x. Cash, 4x, because it's even more volatile and more valuable. So with cash, it's when it's spent. So it gets evaluated when it's spent. It's 4x. Guaranteed payments. If you sign up to pay, if the entity gets a loan, and you're the one that's guaranteeing that loan, and you're paying on it, when you pay on it, that's 4x. And then also donations. So some assets count and some don't. So if you have enabling assets, things that you just could not survive, the entity could not survive without those assets. Those are enabling assets. Those are gonna have a multiple. Facilitating assets. So it's like, I got some pencils for us. Those aren't gonna have a multiple. So he has a bunch of same defaults there. Here's an example. Alice, 20 unpaid hours. Let's say she's at $100 an hour, right? So she did 20 times 100, multiple of 2. You got $4,000. $4,000 worth of ownership. Right now, Bob donates, or $1,000. That's a multiple of 4. So that's 4,000. What's the total theoretical value? The total value of the entity, $8,000. So Alice at this point in time is 50% ownership. Bob is 50%. And remember, this is a claim on what the future cash of the company is going to put out. It's not necessarily to control of the entity. So reasoning about what should count in your ledger. If you start an enterprise, what are you going to decide are the inputs that are countable and should be in the ledger? What are real but are hard to measure? And then what kind of evidence would you require to say, hey, someone logged hours, someone logs hours, maybe you have someone else that reviews the hours, right? You have a buddy system. Someone paid for things or someone donate. What do you put all of that stuff? You put it in the ledger or whatever. How do you track that? Do you say, and then you have receipts for it? Maybe you count that or maybe you don't. You need some way to log all that stuff so it's auditable. Claim number 4. You don't need valuation, you need conversion rules. Early valuation is nearly impossible. He repeats this claim a bunch. Relative input, so again, relative to the person doing the input. You can track that. You can track it fairly. Now, one of the drivers in the book, what he is passionate about is getting people to be entrepreneurial. And he's saying that some lessons you learn when you are with a startup, and I'm talking startup of like 2, 3, 4 people, that like early. Some of the lessons you learn are good lessons. Some of the lessons you learn are bad lessons. What he calls a bad lesson is any lesson that would say doing entrepreneurship is a bad thing. Everyone's a scammer. He calls that a bad lesson. One of the things that you are driving for, you're trying to take this idea, you're trying to make it into something that's valuable as far as someone will write you, he says, write you a fat check. So give you funding. That's the goal for him, right? So that's one conversion moment here, what he calls a conversion moment. They're writing a check. Another conversion moment is getting acquired. Another one is maturity. Everyone's W-2, everyone's getting just paychecks because you have customers now. Those are all conversion moments into what it's called formal equity. So you're doing options, you're doing shares, whatever. You have the ownership that is more solidified. Now it is fixed, basically. But the conversion rules are what you need to get to that clear moment. Conversion rules of inputs into the ledger. And then after you have that, now you have the ownership set. So you have you can explain it to each other and all this. Now, when you convert again to formal equity, that is way more valuable than being able to say, oh, I value the company, because you can't, basically.
I actually experienced the overvaluation from the head honchos at a startup myself. All they were obsessed with was the value of the company. And then when they actually got the offer and it was like 10% of what they thought they were worth, pretty much everything crashed after that. There was layoffs. They went down to a skeleton crew. So yeah, it's not a good thing when that's all you obsess about.
Yeah, and there's 50 ways from Sunday to scam people with the types of shares that they'll do. You have preferred stock and common stock. They do one scam they could do is they tell everyone else that we didn't really get paid a bunch, right? They bought the common stock, but the preferred shares, that those people own all the property. So they have the chairs, let's say everyone's what your chairs are sitting in, and they sell the chair to the purchaser for thousands of dollars, and so or whatever, right? And so the preferred stock people scam the common stock, which is the regular people. There's so many ways that whole system is scammy. So yeah, and I've seen that firsthand. I've told people about that, and it happened to them after I told them within a year. Conversion percentage is now, equity later. So you can calculate percentage at any time from the ledger, the ownership percentage. When converting to formal equity, you pick a divisor. So that's theoretical base value, right? And so the outside investors may use negotiation. They see how you are valuing ownership and all that stuff. And they may say, no, we're going to value it differently. And we're going to get this percentage because we find that injecting this much money is worth this much. And you're going to have a stronger negotiation position than you would if you didn't have discipline and you didn't have your ledger, right? So that's one event. Another event is maturity. So you have customers and you have cash flow and you're paying everyone W-2, regular employees. So you're mature. It's no longer useful to recalculate everything because people are not taking risk. You're taking the risk of a normal job. So at that point in maturity, you can switch over to the ownership on options, bonuses, or what have you. Now, some edge cases. This edge case is something that can ruin enterprises. So absentee owners, we talked about that. Investors do not like it. They do not like someone sitting on 33%. You can't even contact them or whatever. And now the people who are there, they're diluting their ownership in order to give the investor part of the ownership. And then they know that, oh, we may need to do another round. Now I'm going to have to dilute, but I can't ever talk to that 33% owner. And you may have more. So I don't like that. Someone now, as far as the other things, so reasons why people leave, termination, and all that stuff, you need fair rules for that. So soon as someone's treated unfairly, now you have some type of breach of trust of everyone who's still there. So how are you going to deal with the ownership there, right? So there's for cause, not for cause. Somebody did something, inappropriate, and they're terminated. So they're terminated for cause, or you can leave, because you had a death in the family or you need to take care of grandma, whatever. So you're leaving in this definition for a good reason, right? And then there's leaving for not a good reason. And he has all of these incentive systems in the book as far as you want to treat people fairly across the board of all these different reasons for leaving, right? So that's basically what's going on there. And then that's what handle the edge cases. So when do you freeze a pie? This is the conversion. What events forces formal equity, right? So you have funding. They write you $1 million check or whatever. You get bought, acquisition, payroll. That's you are consistent on your W-2. You're paying people based off of the money coming in. These are types of events that you can switch over to formal equity. And he's saying that's kind of the end game where you're moving from this system of dynamic to a more static. What signal shows diminishing returns on new slices? So you're saying you want to entice someone to come in and do the work, but are they taking risks coming with you, or they're not taking any risks? You're paying them W-2. There's no risk, right? And so that would be diminishing return for them when they're coming in, and for you for giving ownership. So at that point, you're saying freeze, static. We're moving to static. We're moving to options. We're done with the slicing or dynamic slicing. And how do you keep incentives aligned after you're mature? So keeping people engaged or what have you. These are all questions that you need to ask yourself as far as manage. The whole slicing pie is all about managing incentives anyway. So you're not going to get away from that after you're mature. You still need to reason about it. So there's some practical steps that he says. Our rules before the work starts. You need inputs, again, hours, big one, and evidence of the inputs. So you're logging the hours, like he said. Just go ahead and do that every week or what have you. Track contributions continuously. Again, weekly versus quarterly. Recalculate often. So this is saying, all right, what's the ownership now? What's the ownership now? So no one gets surprised. It's a big thing. We don't want renegotiation later. We don't want resentment or inequity. Keep the cap table down. Keep the cap table clean. So that's the ownership, right? Who's ownership? Who owns what? Avoid dead equity. So like the absentee owners that we talked about. And then use tools that make the math repeatable and audible. And we have a teaser here, Radical Pie. So we have Slicey Pie, that's this book, countable inputs, and it's dynamic over time, right? So countable. There's another book called Radical Company that we may review. And one thing about that system is that it's good about reasoning about the intangible or the non-countable inputs. So what would that be? You're a good, let's say you're working on an open source project and you're a good evangelist for the project. So you're good with the community. It's really hard to measure that. So you turn around and say, you want to have someone to value that. And the way that they do it is they have something they call RADs. I think it's based off something called the Rothdale distribution. But basically at the end of the month or whatever cycle you choose, you can say, okay, everyone here, you have a certain amount of points and you can give those points to others, not yourself. And it's based off of whatever you think is valuable. And so given that, you now can value those things that are intangible. So if you combine both of those together, you have the countables, you have the non-countables, then you have a system to where you kind of cover all the bases. So that's a kind of a teaser of something that we'll probably review in the near future. So now we have, we can discuss some of these things. people on the panel, where do you see fixed splits, failure modes, wherever you've seen it in the wild, group projects, whatever. What inputs do you think are valuable? Right? What do you think is valuable going into it? We just talked about countable versus uncountable. And do you think it's valuable to convert into fixed equity or not? And then, how do you reason about some of these rules as far as resentment? People saying, hey, I should have got more out of this effort. So here's some things to think about.
Yeah. I definitely think that the fixed split failures are, in every single industry that we could imaginable across the board. Because if everybody was, getting the fair share of what they contribute to any corporation or business, there would be no billionaires today, right? So, when we talk about artists, when they're signing their contracts and whatnot, they're typically not getting paid what they're worth, and they have to pay all of these, obscene fees for venues or for catering to their team or whatever not, because they're locked into those contracts. So, I think that the fixed split is that's a failure everywhere. Even if we do think that we're getting treated fairly, our contributions are always worth more.
Yeah, I think for me, the fixed split, it's just a failure because, predicting the future is impossible. To say, let's split it 50-50 or 30-70 or whatever, it never ends up being where it's exactly you're doing 70% of the work or, they're doing 30%. It's never going to pan out that way.
Agreed.
Yeah. One of the things that motivates me to look into books like this and seek out people who are passionate about the subject is there's the unfairness, the reasoning about fixed splits and so on and so forth. But I don't like the disincentives of the perverse incentives. So soon as you see that the world is unfair, let's say, there's an incentive for you to try to exploit these problems, for you to go into these situations and say, well, one anti-pattern is to try to get into relationships where, oh, I want to lock in my equity and get out of here and never see you again. And then come back later. Like you're incentivized to do that, right? Or you're incentivized to set up systems to where you're doing the least amount of work as possible, or the least amount of contributions in this language here. So it's min-maxing in game theory. You want to minimize your maximum losses. So your loss would be inputs, right? Oh, I'm doing work, right? That is a perverse incentive. Like, so you have a whole class of people, in my opinion, who that's their skill set, is finding that type of thing. If you've ever wondered, hey, this manager over here doesn't do anything. How are they there? Well, I don't. Well, how does this person exist? And if they're, you have the people that are above them praise them or what have you. That they're 50% of their skill set is trying to find these exploits. Is really trying to get to this point to where they're minimizing the amount of inputs that they're doing, and they're leveraging or trying to get these unfair arrangements. Right. So this is just the startup version of that, but you see this everywhere, like B Sovereign was saying. So that's why, I'm pretty passionate about this subject.
Yeah, no, I feel you that it's fairness. It is something that it has to be discussed, and it's a shame that we have to have those discussions with grown adults that are running businesses. You know, because it's you would think that this is something that we learn at the we age, is how to treat people right.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because we have blind spots. Um, Someone could be really, really sensitive to, let's say, oh, I pay a lot of taxes and I'm not really getting much out of that. So I don't like that. So it's all these politicians that are taking my money. All right. Or inflation. They're just printing money and giving it to their friends. And that's also hurting me. They're very sensitive to that type of unfairness. Right. But they're not sensitive to when you enter into these relationships where it's like this fixed split situation, because they'll say, well, you agreed to that. And the people on the other side was like, well, your representatives did all of this, money printing and taxing, raising taxes. That's your representatives that increased it. So you voted for them, or you, in the corporate sense, as a whole, voted. So it's fair. It's still part of your volition or whatever. So
Talking about taxes brings up a point where I've talked to people at times where they're like, I don't have kids. Why do a portion of my taxes go to, fund public schools? And usually my argument is, well, I have kids, but I also believe that even if I didn't have kids, I see it as a benefit that I don't want a bunch of stupid people walking around. I kind of see it that way. Like to me, it's fair to, you're giving someone a shot at some education, even though it's got its own problems, and that'd be a whole other discussion. But yeah, I kind of like beat them off with that type of argument, saying, just I don't want to walk around with a bunch of stupid people around me. I want everyone to be smart and have a chance. So
yeah, underlying that is the argument for infrastructure. So something that helps all of us, we all together get together and pay for it. So it's like, oh, the interstate highways. Can you imagine a situation where those would be paid for by corporations and everything was a toll road or something like that, some system? Or electrification is a big example. They had to compensate or incentivize or subsidize the electric companies in the 50s, 40s, and all this in order to do passes, to put electrification in the rural areas, because they were like, there's not enough people there, we're not doing it. And so the whole idea was, you're not going to get electricity in these other areas unless you subsidize it. Okay, you're subsidizing it and you're paying taxes and you're having to do all that. And that's old school. Nobody even thinks about it anymore. But infrastructure is one of those. Oh, it benefits everyone. It's fair to try to ask for it or what have you. But I think people have blind spots in the unfairness, and they tend to say it's quite ideological. It's very hard to reason about, because again, you have all these issues where you should decide on, in the startup situation is kind of easier, because they're saying you decide on the equity rules beforehand, and then the main argument is that a fixed split is unfair. That's his main. If you believe a fixed split is fair, so if you believe that because you entered into the agreement, it's fair. Anything you enter into, it's fair. If you believe that, then he's saying that you've lost. You have the situations with the 33%, somebody runs off, all this other stuff and all of that. If you say, oh yeah, these other examples, they are kind of not fair. Even if you say that they are fair, they're not pragmatic. It would be, people learn bad lessons from them. Now you opened up to this dynamic situation, and the main thing that I'm pointing out is that just because someone agreed doesn't make it fair. Mean that it's fair. So you could come at that from we all have free will and you're an adult, so it's fair. And you should look any further than that. And I'm saying, well, even if you believe that, from a pragmatic standpoint, you can say, oh, well, these outcomes are better if you do dynamic, all things considered. And then even with that, even if you were to say, well, okay, I don't like the outcomes, it's too hard to measure all of that stuff or whatever. My big one is now if you're incentivizing people to try to make it to where you do fixed splits, you're trying to say basically think of indentured servitude. If you sign the dotted line here, then you're a slave for 9 years, and that's not an enforceable contract. And the most hardcore libertarian, some of them still believe that that is fair, but most of them don't. Right? It's just because you agree to a thing doesn't mean that it's fair. So that's how I look at it. It's beating back this idea that entering into a contract absolves you from reasoning about fairness. Anything else?
I think I'm good here, man. This was this was a very, I think, a very good review on fairness. I really do appreciate the principles of this book for sure.
Okay. Well, I'd like to point people towards the website, the URL, bitlemmas.com. That's going to be there. And I look forward to, if you want to see more about the podcast and some of the other things we're getting into and some of the future topics, you may want to put comments as far as things you want to see us review. You can go there. And I think that's it. Thanks.
Yep. Thank you.